It was early on a Saturday morning, the kind where everything's quiet and calm. The sun had just started coming up, birds were chirping, and I was standing by the window holding my first cup of coffee. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it. That awful buzzing sound. I froze. It wasn't a lawnmower, and it definitely wasn't a car. It was the roar of Karen's hot pink golf cart, and she was coming straight through my garden like it was her personal racetrack. I watched in shock as the front wheels chewed through my flower bed, tearing through my tulips like they were nothing. It felt like watching a lawnmower rip through the Mona Lisa. I ran outside in my slippers, yelling her name, but she didn't even slow down. She just kept going, leaving behind deep, muddy tracks that looked like scars across the garden I had worked so hard on. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a one-time accident. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. Karen had decided that my garden was now her shortcut, and unless I stopped her, she was going to keep doing this until there was nothing left. I didn't want to fight. I didn't ask for this. But in that moment, standing there in my ruined flower bed, I realized she had started one. She fired the first shot, and she had no idea what was coming. A few months before all this started, I had bought the empty lot right next to my house. It wasn't much at first, just grass and dirt. But I saw something in it. I spent weeks turning that space into my dream garden. I built raised flower beds, laid down a curving path made of cobblestones, and even added a little koi pond with a wooden bridge. It became my favorite place to relax. It was quiet, colorful, and peaceful. Exactly what I needed after long days. Honestly, it felt like my own little world. The only part I hadn't finished was the far edge of the garden. There used to be an old service path there that led to the next street, and I just hadn't gotten around to putting up a fence. I figured no one would walk through a garden full of flowers and carefully planted beds. I was wrong. Most of the neighbors were great. They'd stop by, compliment the flowers, or ask what kind of fish I had in the pond. But then there was Karen. She lived 3 houses down, and if you've ever dealt with someone who thinks every rule is made for everyone but them, you know the type. Loud, always complaining to the HOA about ridiculous things, and recently completely obsessed with her shiny hot pink golf cart. She drove it everywhere, blasting 80s rock from a Bluetooth speaker like she was in her own music video. Roads weren't enough for her anymore. She wanted shortcuts. And somehow, she decided my garden was one of them. The first time I noticed something was off, it had rained the night before. I walked out and saw deep, muddy tire tracks slicing through one of the flower beds. It looked like some wild animal, or maybe a kid on a bike, had gone off the path. I didn't think too much of it. Cleaned it up. Replanted. But the next day, more tracks. Same spot. I started getting that feeling in my stomach that tells you something's not right. I thought about putting up a wildlife camera, just to see what was going on. I figured maybe a raccoon. But what I found? Well, let's just say, it wasn't wildlife. It was worse. It was Karen. After seeing the tire tracks a second time, I finally set up a small wildlife camera near the koi pond. I didn't expect much, maybe a possum or a raccoon. But the next morning when I checked the footage, I almost dropped my phone. There she was. Karen. Sitting in her pink golf cart, sunglasses on, music blaring, driving straight through my garden like it was part of some golf course. She didn't even slow down. She even honked as she passed the camera. I couldn't believe it. The next morning, I waited. Sure enough, right on time, here came Karen again, rolling through like she owned the place. I stepped into her path and waved my arms to get her to stop. She hit the brakes just in time, stopping a few feet from me. I tried to keep my voice calm. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted her to stop. I said. "Karen, this is my private garden. Could you please not drive through here?" She pushed her sunglasses up and laughed, like I'd just told her the sky was falling. "It's just a shortcut," she said. "No big deal. I'm not hurting anything." I pointed at the deep tire marks across the marigolds. "You actually are." That's when she hit me with the lie. "There's an easement here. It's public. I've been using it for weeks." I just blinked. "No easement. I owned this lot. It was in the deed." But she didn't care. She shrugged and rolled her eyes like I was the problem. Then, just to prove her point, she gunned the cart forward enough to splash mud onto my shoes, shouted, "Good luck stopping me," and drove off like she'd won something. That's when I knew. This wasn't going to be easy. After that muddy little stunt, I knew being polite wasn't going to cut it. I had asked nicely, and she made it clear she didn't care. So I came up with a better plan, one that would stop her without even needing another word. I went to the hardware store and picked up everything I needed. Wooden trellis panels, concrete bases, some climbing rose plants, and a new security camera system. My plan wasn't just to block her. It was to do it in a way that looked so natural, so peaceful, that no one but her would even realize it was a trap. Over the weekend, I worked quietly, building the new gate right where she'd been driving through. It wasn't just a plain barrier. I designed it to match the rest of the garden. The trellis was clean and sturdy, and once the roses started growing up the sides, it would look like something out of a magazine. To anyone walking by, it just looked like part of the landscaping. But Karen would know. And the best part? I poured so much concrete into the base that a bulldozer would have trouble knocking it over. As I worked, some of the neighbors came over. A few asked what I was building. When I explained, they just smiled and nodded. One older lady from down the street handed me a lemonade and whispered, "You're doing what we all wish we could." That told me everything I needed to know. By Sunday night, the gate was done. It blended in perfectly, like it had always been there. I went to bed that night feeling pretty good. Not because I wanted a fight, but because for the first time, I had drawn a line. And come Monday morning, Karen was going to see it. Monday morning came, and right on schedule I heard the whining buzz of Karen's golf cart. I didn't even have to look. I was already outside, watering the flower bed next to the new gate, waiting for the show. Sure enough, there was a sudden screech of brakes, followed by a loud thud. Karen had slammed right into the gate. I turned around slowly, trying not to laugh. There she was, sitting in her bright pink cart, red-faced and gripping the wheel like it might bite her. She jumped out, marched straight to the gate, and started yanking on it like a toddler throwing a tantrum. The roses shook, but the concrete base didn't budge an inch. She finally gave up and stormed back to her cart. But Karen didn't stay quiet. Later that day, I saw her back again, this time carrying a roll of duct tape, a fat black marker, and a crumpled sheet of paper. She scribbled something quickly, stomped over to the gate, and slapped her official sign right on the wood. It read, "Private property violation. Remove illegal gate immediately. Concerned citizen." I actually laughed out loud. She was acting like taping a note to my fence suddenly made it not mine. That wasn't the end of it either. That evening, my neighbor Dave walked over holding one of Karen's new flyers. She'd printed up a bunch and was handing them out door to door. The flyer claimed I had blocked a historic community access route, and that I was endangering neighborhood flow. Dave couldn't even read the thing without laughing. He had to sit on my porch and catch his breath. The best part? Karen described her golf cart as an essential vehicle for the elderly and disabled, which was rich, considering she was constantly bragging about her daily step count and yoga routine. People weren't buying it. You could see it in their faces. Karen's little drama was turning into a joke, and she didn't even realize it. She thought she was building a case. All she was really building was a reputation, and not the good kind. A couple mornings later, I noticed Karen's golf cart creeping past my house slower than usual. That was already a red flag. But this time, she wasn't alone. Sitting next to her was a guy in a polo shirt holding a clipboard. He looked confused, like he didn't fully understand what he'd signed up for. They circled my property twice before parking near the gate. I watched from the window, already knowing this was about to be another mess. Sure enough, a few minutes later, Karen marched up to my door with clipboard guy close behind. She held up a wrinkled piece of paper like it was the law and said, "This is an official notice. You're in violation of community right-of-way rules. You're ordered to take down that illegal gate immediately." Her voice was loud, like she wanted the whole street to hear. I didn't even blink. I just looked at the guy next to her and asked, "Do you work for the city?" He opened his mouth, paused, then sort of half shrugged. No ID, no badge, nothing. I stepped back inside for a second and came out holding my printed property deed and a copy of the official city map. I unfolded them slowly, right there on the porch. "Here's the deed," I said, "and here's the map showing my property lines. There's no easement, no public path, and this is all private land." Clipboard guy leaned in, looked at the documents, then mumbled something like, "Yeah, this looks pretty legit," and took a step back. Karen's face twitched like she wanted to scream, but she didn't have a comeback. They turned around and left without another word. I didn't let it end there. That night, I gathered every piece of proof. Videos of Karen driving through the garden, photos of her fake signs, the flyer she passed around, and even the moment she showed up with her pretend inspector. I sent it all to the HOA board in one neat email. I didn't ask for anything, just said I'd appreciate their guidance. I knew once they saw the full picture, they wouldn't stay out of it much longer. 2 days after I sent everything to the HOA, an email went out to the entire neighborhood. It was short and to the point. It confirmed there was no public access through my garden, no easement, and that the property was legally mine. It also warned that anyone caught trespassing or messing with the gate could face fines or legal trouble. At the very end, they even thanked me for handling the situation with patience and respect. I had to read that part twice. It was the nicest thing the HOA had ever said to anyone. Karen, of course, didn't take it well. The next day, she taped up flyers on every stop sign and mailbox on the street, announcing a community town hall meeting at her house that weekend. The flyer made it sound serious, like she was gathering people to defend some great cause. But when Saturday came, it was honestly just sad. I watched from my porch as she set up lawn chairs and a folding table in her front yard, pacing around like she was expecting a crowd. In the end, only 3 people showed up: her cousin, her hairdresser, and some poor guy from 2 streets over who clearly thought he was there for a cookout. He even asked where the food was. Karen stood out front with a stack of papers, trying to give a speech to this tiny group like it was a full-on rally. I couldn't hear much, but I caught a few lines about losing neighborhood tradition and standing up for freedom of movement. None of it made any sense. Meanwhile, most of the neighbors were sitting on their porches or behind their curtains, watching the scene play out like it was a reality show. A few people even laughed. One kid rode by on his bike and yelled, "Where's the popcorn?" That moment said it all. Karen had tried to rally the neighborhood and ended up standing alone, trying to sound important in front of 3 people who clearly didn't want to be there. It was the perfect snapshot of how far gone she really was, and how little anyone was willing to follow her. It happened just before sunrise on a quiet weekday morning. I was still in bed, when I heard a loud metal clank outside. It was sharp enough to jolt me straight up. I rushed to the window, and there she was, Karen, in bright neon workout clothes, hoodie up, and looking like she was about to break into a vault. Next to her stood the same guy from the clipboard mess, nervously glancing around like he knew they were doing something really stupid. In Karen's hands were giant bolt cutters, and she wasn't wasting any time. She walked right up to my garden gate, clamped the cutters onto the lock, and started squeezing. The blades barely dented the lock. She growled, reset her grip, and went at it again. On her third try, there was a loud crack. The lock finally snapped. She threw the cutters on the ground like she'd just won a prize and dramatically swung the gate open like she was invading a castle. She climbed into her golf cart, waved her friend over, and they both got ready to drive through my garden like nothing had happened. But the second her front tires crossed the path, I heard it. The quick, brutal hiss of air escaping. The tire spikes I had hidden just under the mulch popped up like magic. All 4 tires popped in seconds. The cart wobbled, tilted slightly, and came to a slow stop. Karen started shouting, slamming the steering wheel, completely losing it. I grabbed my phone, pressed record, and stepped onto the porch without saying a word. I held the phone up so she could see it, and gave her a small wave. That was it. She came storming toward me, yelling about traps and illegal setups, but didn't get far. Just then, 2 police cars pulled up. Someone, maybe a neighbor, had already called them. The officers split up. One came to me, the other went straight to Karen, who was now pacing in my flower bed, hands in the air, ranting. I handed over my deed, the security footage, even the broken lock. Karen, meanwhile, couldn't keep her story straight. She said she thought someone was in danger. Then she said she owned the path. Then she claimed she was saving a lost animal. After a few minutes, the officers gave her a citation for trespassing, vandalism, and destruction of property. She wasn't arrested, but they warned her. One more step onto my land, and next time, she wouldn't be going home. Just when I thought it was finally over, Karen proved me wrong. A few days after the police citation, I stepped outside and nearly gagged. Someone had dumped giant bags of manure right in front of my garden gate. It wasn't just a little prank pile. This was full-on, shovel-it-with-gloves kind of mess. The smell hit hard, and the flies were already circling. Stuck to one of the bags was a bright pink note with messy handwriting that said, "You brought this on yourself." No name, of course, but there was no question who it was from. Later that evening, I spotted her again. She and a couple of her so-called supporters were sneaking around the edge of the sidewalk, hammering in these cheap homemade signs into the grass. Each one had some wild accusation scrawled across it. Dangerous property owner, gate installed illegally, and my personal favorite, golf cart hater. She had officially turned her grudge into a public campaign, like she was running for neighborhood mayor of crazy. I'd had enough. I walked back into my house, grabbed a folder I had put together with all the important documents, my deed, the property map, and still shots from the security footage, and went house to house. I explained everything calmly, showed the facts, and let people see what had actually been happening. Most neighbors didn't even need convincing. They already knew what Karen was like. But a few newer ones seemed genuinely shocked by how far she had taken things. The best part? That night, Mrs. Jensen from 2 doors down started a group chat called Neighborhood Watch Against Karen. People shared updates, jokes, and even memes made from Karen's wildest moments caught on camera. For the first time in a while, it felt like the whole block was on the same page. And that page said Karen had finally pushed things too far. After all the signs, the manure dump, and the non-stop drama, the HOA finally called an emergency meeting. The turnout was huge. It wasn't just the usual quiet crowd either. People actually seemed excited to be there, like they knew this was going to be the moment something real happened. When the meeting started, one neighbor after another stood up and shared their own Karen story. Some were funny, some were just sad, but all of them had the same message. She had been a problem for a long time. One woman talked about how Karen reported her for planting non-approved flowers. Another guy said she complained about his patio chairs being too bright. Someone else mentioned she once measured their mailbox with a tape measure to check if it was regulation size. It was like everyone had been quietly collecting their own piece of the puzzle, and now they were finally putting it all together. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she stood up like she was going to deliver a big speech. But it was just nonsense. She started shouting about a war on golf carts, how she was being bullied for being a leader, and how the HOA was full of traitors. Most people either looked away or stared down at their shoes, trying not to laugh. It was a mess. The HOA president let her finish, then calmly announced the board's decision. Karen was being fined the maximum amount allowed for harassment, property damage, and creating a public nuisance. She was also put on official probation, which meant one more complaint could get her removed from the HOA entirely. The room was completely quiet for half a second. And then, applause. Real, honest applause. That was the moment it became clear. Karen's reign over the neighborhood was finally over. Not long after the HOA lowered the hammer, a giant "For Sale" sign popped up on Karen's lawn. It wasn't a small, subtle one either. It had flashing arrows and bright red letters like she was desperate to make a statement. Word spread fast. People said she was looking for a community that appreciated her leadership. But everyone knew the truth. She was leaving because she lost. On moving day, the whole street watched from behind curtains and front porches. It felt like a weird kind of holiday. Movers carried out mismatched furniture, boxes labeled "fragile" in angry handwriting, and finally, her beat-up golf cart with its sad, flat tires. They loaded it onto a trailer like they were carrying away a bad memory. A few people even waved. Not in a friendly way. More like, finally. Karen wasn't going to leave quietly, though. Right before she got in her van, she stood on her porch and delivered one last dramatic speech. She shouted about how the neighborhood would fall apart without her, how no one would ever match her community spirit, and how we'd all regret pushing her out. Most people just went back inside. A couple neighbors smiled and waved, clearly trying not to laugh. A week later, a young couple moved in, Mike and Claire. They were friendly from the start, showed up with a puppy, and even asked about joining the community garden project Karen had always blocked. They brought over cookies and offered to help with planting. It was like the universe hit reset. A month after that, we threw a little garden party. Lights, lemonade, fresh food, and laughter filled the yard. Near the end of the night, someone handed me a wooden plaque. It read, "Private Paradise. No golf carts allowed." We hung it on the gate, and everyone cheered. Karen was gone, but the peace she tried to wreck was stronger than ever.